p.m. on Friday, and we have some special guests here. We're talking about the Philippines and China's, the South China Sea dispute, which is a very important topic, and we'll find out just how important it is, at least to the Philippines. Our special guests are, to my left, Philippine Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice, number 2 on the court, Antonio Carpio. He was appointed by President Macapal in the year 2001, and he has been serving there for, what, 15
almost
years?
15 years.
Yeah, and you have until the year 2019 when you will retire.
Right.
So you're right in the middle of all the action. And you're here especially for a certain program that took place at the William S. Richardson School of Law just today at lunchtime. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, that's correct.
Welcome to the show, Justice.
Thank you.
And also to his left, we have Jonathan G. Odom, Lieutenant Commander, the Judge Advocate Corps, United States Navy, and he's a military professor at APCSS, the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, and he joins us also. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Professor. And we hope to also include David Cohen in a little while. He's co-director of the ASEAN Law and Integration Center, and he's a professor of law at the William S. Richardson School of Law, and also Berkeley Graduate School. So let's talk about lunch. What happened? This was the cornerstone of your trip. This was a program about the Philippines' position in the South China Sea dispute with China. Tell us what happened this afternoon.
Well, I gave a presentation on the Philippines' perspective on the South China Sea dispute. Basically, the China's 9-dash claim encroach on 80% of our exclusive economic zone and 100% of our extended continental shelf in the West Philippine Sea. That's the sea facing the South China Sea. And China is backing up this claim with newly built air bases, naval bases with new warships. And of course, we cannot match China militarily. And so we have brought the dispute to an UNCLOS tribunal under the law of the sea. And that's where the dispute is now. It's a forum where warships and warplanes don't count, where only the law of the sea will count in the decision of the dispute. And we had our hearing last July on the jurisdiction issue. We expect a ruling on that anytime now. And once there's a ruling, we will have a hearing on the merits probably this November. And after that, we'll wait for the decision of the tribunal.
So what is the decision you're waiting to hear from them?
Well, basically, the most fundamental issue that we have raised is whether China's 9-dash claim can encroach on our exclusive economic zone and our extended continental shelf.
Okay, this is a very interesting case, isn't it?
Yes, it will have wide ramifications all over the region.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. And a couple of things I want to just clarify. The Supreme Court of the Philippines is not directly involved in this suit, right? This is all in front of the tribunal with the law of the sea.
That's correct. The Philippine Supreme Court has no jurisdiction over the dispute. It's with the UNCLOS tribunal, and I'm just trying to explain to everybody the situation in my private capacity.
Yeah. I saw in my reading that the Filipino government wants to bring this to the public.
That's right.
You're part of that.
That's right.
That's great. Okay, let's turn to you, Commander, Professor. Were you part of this program today at the law school?
I was, yes, sir. I was a lecture discussant, so after the Justice made his 45-minute presentation, I gave about a 10-minute comments upon his presentation, as well as just some of my thoughts about the issue.
Summarize for me, would you?
Well, I think that at the core, it's about the international rule of law. And so, as Assistant Secretary of State Russell has talked about, it's not about rocks, it's about rules. So a lot of these features, people are kind of saying, why are they disputing these, or why are they willing to take certain actions? But really, it's about upholding the rule of law. And so the opportunity to hear from the Justice, which I've been reading his speeches for the past year and a half or so as he's been going around trying to get the message out about what the Philippines is wanting to do. The opportunity to speak with him was quite an honor for me. But nonetheless, it's an opportunity for the Philippines to get their story out and to demonstrate how they're trying to resolve these disputes by peaceful means.
Yeah, this is very, very exciting. So you're in international relations as far as the United States Navy is concerned. Can you describe your career briefly for us?
Sure. I've been in the Navy about 19 years. I'm a Navy JAG, so Navy lawyer. I did my first tour in Yokosuka, Japan. I've traveled around and stationed in Italy, Japan, and other places. Most recently, I was at U.S. Pacific Command as a legal advisor for 3 years. Then the past 3 years, I've been at the Office of Secretary of Defense as the Ocean Policy Advisor. But now, a month ago, I moved here, and I'm a professor at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies, so where I'm teaching international law, and I'm here speaking in my personal capacity today. I'm not representing my government, just like the justice. He's not representing his government either,
Okay.
right?
Right.
No, I mean, you're both sort of expert advisors, and you're commenting, interpreting the events that we see unfolding for us. So that's very valuable. But what is the United States position? It's not a member of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. What is its position vis-a-vis what's happening in the South China Sea?
Sure. The United States is not a party to the Law of the Sea Convention, you're correct. But that's not without the lack of trying. For 20 years now, it's been sitting before the U.S. Senate. Presidents of both parties have advocated for the United States to join it. And however, although we haven't ratified it as a party, we do view as most of its provisions as reflecting customary international law, and we follow it as such. And we've been one of the biggest proponents around the world of upholding that rule of law reflected in the convention.
Yeah.
With regards to the South China Sea disputes, when it comes to the competing claims between claimants, we don't take sides on which country has the ultimate sovereignty over features. But we do call upon and expect those nations to resolve it by peaceful means.
Okay. Yeah, but the Chinese have been pretty tough on this, haven't they? They've taken some very aggressive positions. Most recently, they've been building islands. And the problem about an island is, if you build the island, it certainly seems as a practical matter that you own the island. So, and I want to put up a map, if you don't mind, so we can get a handle on all this. This is a map we took from Wikipedia, and it shows the area, and I hope our viewers can see that there's a red line demonstrating how much ocean territory China is claiming, and it seems to usurp everybody else's claims there. A huge amount of territory, and it runs right alongside the Philippines, and for that matter, Australia. And a number of countries are affected by those claims. Could you comment on those claims, Justice?
Yes, if you look at the map, the red dots constitute the 9 dashed lines, and they eat up 80% of our exclusive economic zone. The blue lines are our exclusive economic zone. What's in the center of the map constitutes the high seas. That's about 20% of the South China Sea. So China is claiming everything within the 9 dashed lines. They're claiming the high seas, the exclusive economic zone of the coastal states, and leaving us with a very tiny sliver of water as our territorial sea and exclusive economic zone.
How thin is that sliver? Is that the 3-mile limit or the 12-mile limit?
Well, it's about 12.
12. Mm. And where are the islands that China is building?
Those are in the green spots there. Those are the Spratlys, and China is building 3 air bases, one on Fire Cross Reef, another one on Subi Reef, and the third one, they're still completing the reclamation on Mischief Reef.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there we have a bit of a close-up there. So, on what does China base its claim to all this territory at sea?
Well, China claims that they have historic right since time immemorial, or 1,000 years ago. But if you look at all their ancient maps from the Song Dynasty until the Qing Dynasty, they never show the Spratlys, they never show the parasols. Their southernmost territory, and all their official dynasty maps show that their southernmost territory is Hainan Island.
Oh, Hainan, it's quite some distance away, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's where the red line begins.
That island on top of the red line, that's Hainan.
Yeah, that's quite some distance away from from the right-hand side
Yeah.
of all their claims. So this is a huge area in square miles at sea.
It's about, they're claiming about 3 million square kilometers out of the 3.5 million square kilometers total surface area of the South China Sea, 85.7% of the South China Sea.
Well, I suppose, you know, if you really want to be expansive, claim the whole world. But why are they doing this?
Well, the way I assess it is a claim to all the economic resources within the Nine Dash Line, the fish, the oil, gas, and other mineral resources, and also to control, for military purposes, the South China Sea.
Are they actually taking resources out of the area they claim right now? Are they fishing, for example?
Yeah, they're fishing in our traditional fishing ground. They have prevented our fishing ships from going there. They said if you want to fish here, you get permission from us, but of course, we've not allowed our fishing vessels to get permission from them because that would be conceding sovereignty to them. So they're taking the fish for themselves, and every time we try to send a survey ship to Reed Bank, that's within our exclusive economic zone, their Coast Guard vessels harass our survey ships, so we cannot explore the Reed Bank.
And that's threatening, of course.
Yes, it's threatening, and even on the side of Vietnam, they have posted, they have sunk an oil rig there a few months ago, and
they're taking
Vietnamese,
oil.
of course, rioted. Well, they left because they did not find oil, but they're exploring on areas that belong exclusively to Vietnam. The same way that they have been preventing our survey ships from exploring our own EEZ.
Mhm. So you have a number of countries involved. I looked and saw a list of 9 territorial disputes altogether, and I think of the 9, the Philippines is involved in 7 of them. So you have your hands full with multiple disputes over multiple claims. But I wonder about all the other countries. There are at least 3 or 4 other countries that are in a similar situation. They're in the map. And they believe that they own a lot of this area. And I just wonder what your relations are with them, whether you respect their claims, whether they respect your claims. Not China, but the other ones.
Well, in the arbitration case, Vietnam has submitted a letter to the tribunal saying that they agree with the Philippines on the invalidity of the 9 dash lines, and they also agree with us that 9 of the islands there generate an exclusive economic zone, but only a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles. But of course, they claim the islands as their own, in the same way that we claim some of the islands as their own. But it's between the Philippines and Vietnam and Malaysia, we can manage the dispute because we don't throw our weight around. We don't grab resources unless there's an agreement. It's a different case with China because they harass our survey ships. They prevent our fishermen from fishing there.
So prior to the initiation of the proceeding now in front of the United Nations Commission on Law of the Sea, what was happening? Were they harassing you then? Were there threats and posturing then? I take it that what happened was they were pushing you around. You didn't want to get into a physical confrontation with them. That wouldn't be advisable. So that's why you thought of the strategy of going to the United Nations Commission on Law of the Sea, this tribunal. Was that what happened?
Yes, obviously we are no match to China militarily, and they have been using their Coast Guard vessels. They have the biggest Coast Guard fleet in the world, and we cannot match that. So we decided to bring the dispute to a forum where there's a level playing field, where warships don't count, but only the law of the sea will decide the dispute.
Yeah, brilliant move. It's a good idea. And so now you have a fair chance of winning in the Law of the Sea Tribunal. A part of the reason is that China's not participating in that proceeding. Can you talk about that?
Yes, China refuses to participate, probably because they know they have a weak hand. But under the Law of the Sea, the tribunal will proceed if it has jurisdiction, and anytime now the tribunal will rule on the jurisdictional issue.
And if I might add, with regards to the tribunal, from what I've observed, they have gone out of their way to consider other pieces of information. They've gone out of their way to be deliberate and ask questions as if they were trying to determine China's position. And they were asking the questions of the Philippines. They were trying to, in abundance of caution, they've tried to do everything they can to be deliberate in this, even though one of the parties doesn't participate.
Very interesting. Let's take a short break, and we'll come back in 1 minute, and hopefully we can, at that time, include David Cohen in our discussion. We'll be right back.
Aloha, my name is Roy Kodani, and every Wednesday at 1 p.m. I host Life in the Law, which is a segment of ThinkTech Hawaii. And basically, I host guests who have some relevancy to law in Hawaii. And I hope you will continue to tune in. If you have questions, tweet us at ThinkTech Hawaii. Mahalo.
Aloha, this is Alice V. Hagan from ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show is a bi-weekly show on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. We invite interesting people, entrepreneurs, fascinating leaders who contribute to the social economic well-being of our state. Please tune in to my show, Business Education Spotlight, ThinkTech Hawaii, bi-weekly, Thursday, 3 to 4 p.m. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Carlos Juarez, host of Global Connections, and I want to invite you to come join us. We cover a range of global issues. We bring a lot of expert opinion, a lot of issues, whether they're contemporary events happening in the world or maybe looking at things from a more historical perspective. Global issues, very important for us to understand in this globally interconnected world. Join us here on Global Connections.
Hi, I'm Chris Leatham, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with ThinkTech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Aloha, my name is Jim Sean, and I'm host of a show called Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Each week, live streaming at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii, we interview people who have special insights into education from early education through K-12, all the way through higher education and beyond. Both public and private are areas we're interested in. We dig deeper. We try to find out what it's really like to be involved in making change, advocating for it, how you reform, what people's philosophies are in reforming it. As I said, we're live streaming every Wednesday at noon on ThinkTech Hawaii. And later on, you can find these interviews on YouTube and on the Hawaii Educational Policy Center website. We hope you join us as many times as possible. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live. I'm Jay Fidell here on ThinkTech, and we are talking about ThinkTech Asia. We're talking today more specifically in this special broadcast about the Philippines in the dispute over the South China Sea. And we have with us special guests, Philippine Supreme Court Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio. We have Commander Jonathan Odom of the JAG Corps in the United States Navy, and a professor at the APCSS, the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. And finally, joining us after the break is David Cohen. He's a co-director of the ASEAN Law and Integration Center and a professor of law at the William S. Richardson School of Law and a professor at UC Berkeley Graduate School. Welcome to you, David Cohen.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little about why you're interested in this matter?
I'm interested in it from a legal perspective and a political perspective because I think it's one of the most important and serious challenges that is facing both the region, Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly, and the United States, because there is a great deal at stake that goes beyond the South China Sea. And from a legal standpoint, as we've already heard, what's at stake is the rule of law.
Yes. Okay, we'll come back to that because I certainly want to discuss that in the latter part of the show. So, Justice, tell us how the proceedings in the tribunal work. Where does it take place? Is it like a trial court? Is it like an appellate court? Who speaks when? Is there evidence taken? Are there questions asked? How does it go?
Well, the tribunal sits at The Hague at the Permanent Court of Arbitration. There are 5 judges. It's chaired by Mr. Mensa. is a Kenyan who used to be president of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. The other members are very reputable people, former judges of the ITLOS also. And we, of course, we had our hearing, and our lawyers, headed by an American counsel, Mr. Paul Reichler, argued for us. There's also a hearing. There will be a hearing on the merits. We will introduce evidence if there's a hearing that will be called this November for the reception of evidence. We will have to prove that certain features are low tide elevations or not, so there will be taking of evidence. There will be, I think, just a 1 week trial for the reception of evidence. After that, it will be submitted for decision.
Okay, and is the decision final?
Decision is final. There's no appeal. There's no motion for recon, and under the convention, both parties, whether one appeared or not, all the parties must comply with the decision of the tribunal.
Will the Chinese comply?
Well, they have said that they will ignore the ruling, any ruling that's adverse to them.
So their position is there's no jurisdiction by the tribunal in the first place. Therefore, they did not appear in the determination of jurisdiction. Did they file any briefs, memos? Did they take a position in writing?
They submitted, surprisingly, a position paper why the tribunal has no jurisdiction. Although they submitted the position paper, they also said, we are not participating. Please don't consider this as a participation.
Like a special appearance on jurisdiction.
Yes, like a special appearance on jurisdiction.
Yeah. Okay, and of course that's not as good as making a real appearance, but so you have a sense that probably the court, knock wood, will agree with the Philippines and the others to say that the court does have jurisdiction. They always say that courts rule in favor of their own jurisdiction, don't they say that? And they're likely to rule in favor of jurisdiction here, no?
Well, we are confident that the tribunal has jurisdiction because this is the actions of China under the 9 dash lines claim is so incompatible with the law of the sea.
Yeah. Now, in the next part of the case, that'll be an evidentiary hearing. Do you think that China will participate in that, or will they turn their backs on that one too?
Well, I hope they will participate, but so far there's no indication that they will.
Okay, so this might go right down to a judgment, so to speak, an award, so to speak, even without participation by the Chinese.
Well, it looks like that will happen because they have not been participating.
Okay. Would you prefer they participate?
Well, so that, yes, I would have preferred that they participated because then they would be bound. I mean, they have no more justification for not complying.
Yeah.
But now they're saying we will not comply because we're not participating. But you know, the law of the sea is so structured that all disputes must be settled within the convention. That's why you have this compulsory arbitration, compulsory conciliation.
Yeah. So has this tribunal been successful in resolving disputes in the past? Does it have a track record of resolving major problems or even minor ones? Or does it run into these jurisdictional issues?
Well,
What happens?
in this particular situation, this is the arbitral tribunal. This is not the actual International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, which is the standing court that always exists. That court has held, I believe, 21 or 22 decisions, most of which the state parties have complied with the rulings of the court. The default is in these situations, though, that an arbitral tribunal will be set up to review these cases. And so the question as to whether this particular arbitral tribunal's rulings in the past have been followed, this is the first time these 5 gentlemen have met as justices for a case.
So we're testing new waters here, so to speak.
We are, but they're legitimate jurists, properly designated, and I think that it's just a matter of the convention says that either whether it's an arbitral tribunal or the International Tribunal for Law of the Sea, the parties shall comply with the rulings of the court.
Does the tribunal have the right, the power to ask for and receive briefs amicus curiae? Can third parties make statements and take position? Can the United States file some paper in this case?
They potentially could. I'm not sure. I don't have inside knowledge as to whether they are. Of
course.
But I know in this particular case, for example, just as China submitted that position paper in December, the Philippines, Vietnam that same week submitted a statement to the tribunal saying, hey, we have interests in what happens in this litigation, and we ask the right to be an observer at the hearing. And so in July, when the hearing was held in The Hague, not only Vietnam, but several other Southeast Asian nations observed the event.
So this is, let me get it straight. Who are the parties to the case we're talking about? Who are the actual parties?
There are only two parties, the Philippines and China. All the rest are observers. Vietnam has submitted a letter, but they did not participate. It's just an information to the court that they are supporting our position.
Do you have anything to add to this?
Given the expertise of these two gentlemen, I think they've answered your question quite sufficiently.
Well, I do want to explore your prognostications about what will happen. It's just taking it from the four quarters of this conversation, it sounds like you should have a ruling in your favor on the first hearing on jurisdiction. And you should have a hearing on the evidence coming soon. And from what you say, I mean, I'd be interested in knowing what kind of evidence you think will be submitted and how the court will handle it, react, and what kind of award you hope to get and what you think you will get.
Well, we are submitting nautical charts of China, of the Philippines, UK, US, Japan, Russia, all showing that these features that we are saying are low tide elevations are indeed low tide elevations. We are also showing...
Why is elevation important? Why is low tide elevation important?
If it's a low tide elevation within our EEZ, then it's only the Philippines that can create artificial islands.
Not China.
Not China.
Okay.
So very important.
Yeah.
And we are also presenting maps, ancient maps. The tribunal asked us to present ancient maps to show that historically there was no claim by China at all over these waters.
They made that up.
Well, I have searched all the records and I have not found any. They started their claim sometime in the 1930s, but before that, even their own constitutions from 1912 to 1946 state that their southernmost territory is Hainan province.
Interesting.
I think an important thing to note about the Philippines case is that they submitted their memorial to the tribunal, and I believe the memorial was approximately 300 pages, and the evidence that they submitted just on the jurisdiction question was, I believe, 3,000 or 4,000 pages of evidence. And I think from most nations' perspective, as much as we complain about lawyers, they are doing an exhaustive job of trying to prove their case, and they're willing to be transparent and lay that out, and I think that's respectable and commendable.
Yeah.
And I think from that perspective, one has to ask why the Chinese are not taking this opportunity to present their case. And I don't have to be as diplomatic as these gentlemen, and that just may be because they don't really have a case.
Could be, but what would you advise them to do, David, if you were their lawyer?
Well, that assumes that they're listening to lawyers. What they're doing is sending in their Navy and building islands while this process is going on.
Yeah.
And so I think one has to regard this from the legal perspective, but also from the political perspective. And from the political perspective, this is a regional superpower asserting itself over weaker neighbors and seeing whether or not it can get away with it.
Indeed. But would you, in that circumstance, I think we all agree that's what they're doing. It's just muscle. But as their lawyer, would you suggest that they go participate in this case?
Not if they don't have a case that can answer effectively to the massive documentation that the Philippines is providing, all of which seems to indicate that the 9-dash line is an invention rather than a legal or historical fact.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like they're doing what we would advise them to do.
Yes,
This
exactly.
is the smartest thing they can do because they probably have no case. And then the question is extending that same strategy further to the hearing on the merits. They won't abide by it because it's a matter in the end of muscle.
Well, and that's why the rule of law is at stake, because the international law of the sea does not work that you use it when it's in your favor and you ignore it when it doesn't. And so I think, as Justice Carpio was rightly pointing out in his remarks today at the law school, it's a future of the law of the sea that is, and this convention, which is at stake as well.
Yes, isn't it? You know, when I went to law school, I can hardly remember anymore, but they told us international law was what you make of it. You can abide by it or not abide by it based on your interest. It's the way you put it a minute ago sounded right to me. I mean, as to what they were telling me. So this is a test of international law.
It is, but it also is a test of a regional, I mean, excuse me, a stable legal order, and that there are rights and responsibilities that nations have. And what I mean by that is China is a party to the Law of the Sea Convention, which they joined in '96. They have an obligation to comply with these decisions. They also had a right to put a judge on the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which they did. They also submit licenses so that they can do deep seabed mining out in the middle of the deep seabed. So they're enjoying those rights, but with rights comes obligations. And so if they seek to undermine that aspect of the legal order, are they going to be cutting off their nose to spite their face in the future?
Is this a Xi Jinping thing? Is this his administration acting?
Well, the 9-dash line started way back in the 1940s. That was an invention by the Kuomintang government when the Kuomintang government was in control of mainland China. The communists have adopted it as their own. But they have been trying to present this, but it's only now that they have the naval might to enforce it, and that's why they're enforcing it. And unfortunately, the coastal countries around the South China Sea cannot match their military might.
How does this play in China? What do the Chinese people think about this, if anything?
Well, yeah, I think one good point, earlier you were asking about the fish and the oil and natural resources in the South China Sea. I would make the argument that if you removed all the fish and you removed all those natural resources, there would still be the dispute, particularly from China, because there's a strong sense of nationalism in China on this issue. Their children have been taught for generations that the South China Sea belongs to them in their school. And so that's really, how do you get past that? If someone now says, I have indisputable sovereignty over the South China Sea, how do you move past that to make some sort of accommodation and actually negotiate a resolution? It's pretty tough.
Pretty tough. And if as we predict, if the case in chief is heard and goes against China, it is pretty tough for China to accede to that, because they would essentially be admitting that they had no case.
Well, and that's one of the geniuses of handling these in third-party dispute resolution, like through a court, is that in some respects you can say, hey, we put it to a tribunal, we're respecting the ruling of that tribunal, and that's what allows you to move beyond a long-held political position.
China does not have a great record on the rule of law, you know. Just thought I'd throw that in on you.
I don't hear any disagreement.
Yeah, I was going to say, in their defense, and I rarely use that phrase, but in their defense, they have become more progressive on the law. Clearly not as fast as most nations would expect them to. But it used to be they had a purely instrumental view. How do I use the law to my benefit all the time? And you know, hopefully they will warm up to that, but it is a real challenge.
Well, part of getting them to warm up is to go out and talk to the public exactly what you're doing. And I'm sure others in the Philippines are doing the same thing, try to get the word out to the world. And maybe that will have some effect, because China is responsive to bad public opinion, no? Both in the country and externally.
Well, and just to follow up on what Commander Odom was saying, I mean, it's not that the Chinese government does not participate in the international legal regime. They do so extremely actively. They have justices on many, if not most, of the most important tribunals in the world. So they, on the one hand, they recognize the validity of this international legal order. But on the other hand, when we're in situations like this, where they appear to see a conflict between their national interests and that order that they otherwise support, then they don't support the order anymore.
It's strategy, it's tactics, and it's all very practical. So, David, suppose the case goes against them. Do you think they will accede to the award at the end?
Well, I wish I had the answer to that question. And Justice Carpio probably has a better idea about that than I do. But I think what Commander Odom said is right. I mean, the agreement to settle disputes through arbitration or through legal means offers what's essentially a face-saving way of one side accepting that it has lost, and we've seen that in various other disputes in Southeast Asia, like between Thailand and Cambodia, over the Preah Temple, between Malaysia and Singapore, over a few rocks that were at issue in the Straits of Malacca and so forth. So.
Perfect example, most recently, India and Bangladesh had a maritime dispute, long-standing maritime dispute. India decided that they would be willing to submit the dispute to international tribunal. The case came out against India, what they wanted, but India immediately came out and said, we support this ruling, let's move forward. Let's think about this relationship of these two countries looking ahead, and we're willing to accept the verdict of the court.
Yeah, and it's more than that. It's we'll accept the verdict of the court. We'll accept international law. We'll accept the court. We'll accept a way of resolving disputes that doesn't involve violence and confrontation.
Right.
That's, I think, at the end of the day, that's what's at stake here. We all, including China, we need to avoid violence and confrontation. And maybe you have to just face them down, make them admit that.
Yes, eventually it will come to that, because the alternative, if you don't follow the rule of law, then the only way that a country, a coastal state, can protect its maritime zone is to acquire warships, warplanes, anti-ship missiles, and it will be a costly arms race.
Yeah. And the costlier the arms race, the more the arms, the greater the risk.
That's right.
Of confrontation, of physical confrontation. Yeah, so this is an important case, and I suppose we should thank you. We should thank the Philippines for starting this case, because it benefits everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very important case because I think if UNCLOS doesn't apply to the South China Sea dispute, then it cannot apply to any other maritime dispute anywhere in the world.
This could change the way maritime disputes are handled everywhere. This is going to be the case, one way or the other, to cast a shadow on how maritime disputes are resolved. It would change the practice, if not the law. Maybe the law, too. So, are you teaching this in class, Professor?
I don't teach law of the sea. I teach international criminal law, international humanitarian law, human rights law. There are others of my colleagues who have vastly greater expertise on the law of the sea. But this is because I do a lot of work in Southeast Asia and with ASEAN. This is an issue that's of considerable concern to me as well.
Well, what about ASEAN? How does ASEAN weigh in on this case?
Well, I wish that ASEAN, as an association of Southeast Asian nations, was weighing in with one voice on this case. And there are ASEAN member states that clearly recognize the importance of taking a united and firm stand on this. And there are others that don't as immediately have their interests at stake and have other sort of interests, particularly involving their relations with China. And so there is a division within ASEAN on this issue.
Can you say who's on what side?
Well, I mean, you have the states that are immediately concerned, which are Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Indonesia, Brunei. And then you have states that, well, for example, Laos, PDR, or Cambodia and Myanmar, who are more geographically remote from this area. And also have very different relations with China than some of the other ASEAN member states.
And one of the challenges with ASEAN in this situation is that they operate, and they've long operated, by a method of consensus. And so trying to reach a consensus among the 10 members of ASEAN on this, on what should be a way ahead, is a very incremental approach. And they're not going to change that process, and it's not for us to criticize it, but it does make for some challenges. I think one of the things that the Philippines has kind of been exposed to in the past 2 years is a bit of a whisper campaign, not saying from whom or where, but kind of, hey, if you wouldn't have filed this lawsuit, things would be much better. And I don't know that...
Don't be affected by that.
Yeah, and I don't know that I agree with that, but there's a potential of it trying to divide the Philippines away from the rest of ASEAN, and I hope they don't succeed on that.
And since I don't have to be as careful as Commander Odom does, I would say that the Philippines has done a significant service to ASEAN and to the region through taking this action, because we know what the result will be of no action.
Yes, yes, good point. If we take no action, where does that leave the Philippines? Where does it leave the U.S.? I mean, this has military implications. You are in the military.
Yes.
And you must be thinking about this. This is one step away from a world without rule of law, or one step away from physical force in terms of determining who owns what.
Right. And one of the U.S. National interests in the South China Sea that all of our leaders have repeated over and over again is the interest in freedom of navigation and preserving that freedom. And so if not only can a country, if they dominate their neighbors and push back on all the maritime claims, but if they also establish maritime claims that are excessive under the law of the Sea Convention, we do take a side. We side with the law on those. And under the U.S. freedom of navigation policy and program for decades, we've been challenging those excessive claims.
Justice, so we're almost out of time. I'd like to let you close. I'd like to let you take a moment and talk to the United States about what you would like to see happen here. And just for that purpose, we have one camera, which we call the Barack Obama camera. And we, in fact, we have a picture on that camera. And if you could address this camera over here as if it were President Barack Obama, what would you say to him about this whole matter?
Well, I think this is a matter close to the hearts of all Americans because this involves the rule of law. If we don't apply UNCLOS to this dispute, then how do we resolve the dispute? It will be resolved by force of arms. And if that happens to the South China Sea, what about the other disputes in the world? America will have more trouble in its hands trying to put out fires. So it's very important that we settle this issue in accordance with the law of the sea, because this will, otherwise it will set a terrible precedent. China is putting up an island in the high seas. They cannot do that under UNCLOS because you cannot militarize the high seas. If that is allowed, there will be an island building race among naval powers to put up islands in all the high seas of the world. And the world will be a far unsafe place to live in. So it is a very important case.
I was right when I said you're doing a favor for all of us, everywhere.
Thank you.
We have to reinforce the law of the sea. We have to make it work to solve disputes. We can't let people do things by self-help. Yeah. Thank you very much, Justice.
Thank you.
Thank you,
also.
Commander Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Wonderful to have you here.
Very good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for this special show. Aloha.
Hello.